Good Dram Show, me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode, commented, liked, all that kind of stuff. As per usual, your support is very much appreciated, and there seemed to be quite a lot of favourable comments about, yeah, it's nice to see blended whiskies being reviewed, and, you know, they're much maligned, and, you know, there are some great blends out there, etc., etc., and which is absolutely true. As I said in the episode, the whisky industry was founded on blended whiskies, so I think they shouldn't be overlooked at all, because there's some great blends out there, as I showed last week. Anyway, that was last week, and this is this week. And this week, right, as you can see, we're looking once again at some bottlings by Duncan Taylor. As you will remember, a few weeks ago I did an episode using a number of the samples that they kindly sent, and they were mainly I think they were all the Dimensions range, and I mentioned at the time that they kindly sent some samples of their Battlehill range, which is their 46% bottled range, and I said, you know, I would obviously in due course review them. So I thought, well, why not? Let's review them now. You know, as you well know, I'm a big supporter of the independent sector, and so as there was only 4 Battlehill samples, I thought, well, I may as well just use the other 2 Dimension samples that they kindly sent. Makes it up to 6, nice round number for an episode of the show. So obviously not a huge amount to say, as I probably covered it in the last episode that I did on Duncan Taylor, and who knows, when all this kind of coronavirus madness has settled down and we're back in a semblance of normality, yeah, who knows, I may well have some of these on the shelf. I don't honestly know. It's kind of playing it week to week at the moment. While we're talking about the coronavirus thing, the shop is now reopened. We have all the sort of PPE stuff in place, although the downstairs showroom still isn't open yet. It may well probably open beginning of July, possibly. We haven't quite figured that one out. We haven't had a chance to give it a really good clean and sorting out. So at the moment, just the upstairs portion of the shop is open. Of course, obviously you can still purchase any product that we do, the tobacco, the whiskey, the wine. It's just you won't be able to go downstairs and into the showroom and browse. If you have an idea of what you would like, then obviously the upstairs staff would certainly be able to help and sort you out, as they say. So anyway, let's just take a look at what we'll be reviewing today. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off today's tasting with a 10-year-old Tobermory. Oh yes, sharp intake of breath there. Yes, one of my favourite distilleries. Now, as you probably remember, I did a comparison episode of the show a few months ago, I think it was now, of old and new Tobermory and Lecce, and came up with the theory that they'd cleaned up the spirit by adjusting their cut points somewhere between 2007 and 2009. So this was distilled in 2008 and bottled last year. So theoretically, this should be clean, new Tobermory. None of your horrible cardboardy wet in there, hopefully. But we shall see. Second bottle we'll be looking at is yet another one of my favourite distilleries. Oh yeah, we're doing well today, aren't we? This is a 13-year-old Jura, aged in American oak, obviously bottled at 46%, and distilled in 2005. So, I mean, you know, Jura can be hit and miss. I have tasted some pleasant Jura. I've tasted some not so pleasant Jura, so we'll see where that one lies in the spectrum, shall we say. Now, the third bottling we'll be looking at is the first of the 2 leftover Dimensions bottlings. This is a 10-year-old Drumblade, bottled at 54.6%. It's a sherry cask, number 149000062. Distilled in August of 2008 and bottled in May of 2019. And you're probably thinking, what the hell is Drumblade? Which is exactly what I thought when I got the sample. I did some research and I thought I figured it out, but I thought I'd best check with Duncan Taylor themselves to make sure I knew exactly what I was talking about, and it is apparently Dalrymple. And you're probably wondering what the hell Dalrymple is, aren't you? Yes, yeah. Well, Dalrymple is teaspoon Isobay. Now, as you know, I think is it Grant's that own Isobay? I should have checked, shouldn't I? Now, they produce two spirits. They do a peated and an unpeated. The peated is reserved for bottling under their own label, and I have tasted it once, and it's supposedly heavily peated, but I didn't get a huge amount of peat. You know, I was quite surprised. I tasted it blind, in actual fact, and was quite surprised to find out what it actually is. So, not having tasted unpeated Isobay, I think this should be quite interesting. I don't know what it's teaspooned with, but really, whatever it's teaspooned with is pretty much an irrelevance, isn't it? It's just basically so it can't be sold as a single malt. The next bottling we'll be looking at is back to one of the Battlehill bottlings. God dear me. So this is a Miltonduff, again another sherry matured bottling. Must be mad today. All the sherry, again 10 years old, distilled in 2008, bottled I think in 2019, and bottled at 46%. And you know, Miltonduff does sherry quite well. It's that lovely sort of robust character it has. Does lend itself to sherry, but can often be, obviously, like a lot of spirits, swamped by said sherry. Then we're going to look at yet another sherry bottling. Oh dear. This is the Dimensions Aultmore 2008. It's an 11-year-old. It was distilled in September of 2008 and bottled in February of this year. Sherry cask number 95001. So again, another one of those relatively robust spirits, which, I mean, Aultmore, yeah, it can be nice. Again, it's a bit hit and miss, it has to be said. I've tasted some absolutely gorgeous bottlings of Aultmore and some maybe not so gorgeous bottlings. So we'll see which one this one is. And finally, we're going to end with a bit of peat, because that's always a good thing to end with, in my personal opinion. And this is a Battlehill Bunnahabhain. It's peated Bunnahabhain. It's 4 years old. Yes, so it was distilled in 2014, bottled in 2019. Now, yeah, you're probably thinking, well, it's going to be a bit young, and it could well be. Although sometimes, young peated malts are a great deal of fun. I've tasted several. Bunnahabhain does seem to sort of get away with being bottled young, and so does some of the other ones. That I've just completely lost my train of thought with, but anyway, we'll taste it. We'll find out whether it's a bit too young, or whether it's got that wonderful young, intense, peaty character. So anyway, yeah, that's the lineup. Let's make a start with some Tobermory then. Right. So let's kick off with the Tobermory. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Modern Tobermory. Yes, clean for a start. So big plus points on that one. It's now, if you remember, the 12-year-old, the current 12-year-old distillery bottling is all aged in first fill American oak and virgin oak, and is oak. And it's oak. I mean, I would guess this is definitely a first fill American oak cask, or casks I should say. It's got lots of vanilla, lots of creamy vanilla. It's got a little meatiness there in the background, a little bit of almost kind of bovrily notes. There's a touch of white fruit, there's a little rose petal, but it is predominantly oak at the end of the day, and so it's clean. I mean, that's the main thing, and it again, it kind of reinforces my opinion that they have indeed altered their cut points, and so from that point of view, it's actually quite a pleasant nose, as long as you love mountains of oak, that is. See what it passes like. Sweet, creamy, oaky. There's a bit of barley, there's a bit of white fruit, there's a touch of salt. Again, no faintiness, no cardboardiness, clean spirit. Again, I think if you were tasting that blind, you'd probably say yes, it's obviously got a coastal character. It would obviously then lead you to thinking it was obviously an island malt, but there's no kind of spirit character as such, shall we say. There's a little bit of barley, there's a bit of white fruit. Don't know what it retails for, but these are all relatively young, and I would guess they're going to be in and around the £50-odd mark, and you know, you wouldn't be disappointed if you picked that one up. If you like Tobermory, if you like modern Tobermory, if you like overly oaked Tobermory, well, that's going to float your boat, and you know, it's not a bad starter. Okay, so let's move on to the 13-year-old Jura. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite sweet, in sort of sweet barley terms. It's got quite an Auchentoshan-y kind of red currants, berries, maybe not quite so strawberry-like as Auchentoshan. I swear to God this was actually Auchentoshan. I mean, it just got that pepper. It's got that sort of, you know, classic Auchentoshan-y kind of character, which just I'm really surprised with, to be honest with you. I can't say I've ever quite come across a bottling of Jura that's like this, and it's pleasant. You know, again, you know, it's 13, so it's probably going to be, I would guess you're looking at 60-70 quid maybe. Yeah, it's pleasant enough. It's a bit simplistic, but at least it's clean. Anyway, let's see what the pass like. Sweet, barley, again that sort of red currant, slightly red curranty jelly kind of note. There's a little cardboardiness. I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's dirty, but there is that sort of slight edge to it, which I'm not surprised with Jura. Again, it's really Toshan-y, you know, it has that sort of, you know, slight high-toned note, you know, which I often pick up with Auchentoshan being crippled distilled, and it just peppery, a little bit of salt possibly. Again, like I said, if I was tasting this blind, I would swear this was Auchentoshan, not Jura. Very unusual. I mean, it's possible that it could actually be Auchentoshan and it was just the wrong label put on it. I honestly don't know, because if that is Jura, that's probably one of the most unusual bottlings of Jura I've ever come across. Okay, so let's move on to the Drumblade. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? That's a lovely nose, actually. It's really pollen-like. It's dusty. It's got apricot, barley husks, malt, little sort of almost hyacinth kind of floral note, a little bit of lime, some oak, some malt. There's a almost kind of a little almost tea leafy kind of note there, just right in the background. It's unusual. It's interesting. It's pretty complex in actual fact. I think that sort of tea leafy note must be coming from the sherry, because I'm not getting any big dried fruits or Oloroso or anything like that. So I'm guessing this was probably a refill sherry cask, probably fairly well used, I would have thought. Yeah, it's interesting, and you know, this is how I prefer my sherry casks, has to be said, as you well know. So interesting. Let's see what the bar's like. Quite caramelly. I think it's pretty natural. I don't think this is added caramel. It's got an edginess, it's got a slight burnt note to the caramel. There's a little bit of mar. It does taste quite young. It's a little short. There's a little raw. There's again a little bit of a sherry sweetness to it, but not a huge amount. Again, I think it's really interesting. I think personally I would have left that a little longer in the cask, just to sort of like take off that slight rawness. But then, you know, we are looking at, it's what, 54%, so it probably could have got away with a few more years before getting down the ABV. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it. I don't know whether that will lengthen it. It's a little sugar water now on the nose. I did kind of wonder how well it would do with water. I mean, it's brought out a little bit more of the white fruits. There's a little bit more gooseberry and a little bit more oak vanillins. See what it tastes like. Again, it's a little watery and a little bitter on the finish now. Doesn't quite taste quite so raw, but I still think that could have done with a little bit more time. I think it's an interesting spirit, nevertheless. Just needed a little more time, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Miltonduff. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now, this is more active sherry casks. It's got that sort of, you know, the sherry dried fruit. It's quite malty, it's dense. It's got that lovely, so I like the way that the herbal sherry cask is interacting with the sort of slightly herbal, heathery spirit character. Yeah, it's got character. It's not a one-dimensional sherry monster. It is leading more towards the sort of, there's more of the sherry character than there is of the spirit character, but it's certainly not totally swamped. A little bit of raisinated fruit. Yeah, again, you know, pleasant. You wouldn't be disappointed if you picked up this bottle. If you like sort of, you know, robust sherry matured whiskies that are not overly sherried, then yeah, see what it tastes like. A bit heavier on the sherry on the palate. I'm getting less in the way of spirit character. It's more Oloroso, raisinated fruits, a little bit of herbal notes. Could be a little bit of distillery character coming in there. A little bit of toffee, chocolate, malt. Good length. A little bitterness on the finish, you know, but that's all kind of working in really well. Yeah, and like I said, I think the quality of that is pretty good. It's not a style, obviously, that I absolutely love, and but it's clean, and you know, I guess 50 odd quid. I suppose you would, again, you wouldn't be disappointed if you picked that up. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Aultmore. Let's see what those give us on this then, shall we? Again, we're talking a lot, well, not... Right, okay, so let's move on to the Aultmore. Let's see what those give us on this end, shall we? Right, quite a lot of sherry, dried fruits, violets, malt. There is a very minor sulphur note in here, and I think you could say I pick up on sulphur quite easily. It's probably as much a curse as anything else, and I just have this kind of sensitivity to sulphur, and I mean, we're not talking sort of huge rotten eggs and vegetal sulphur, but there is just a little bit in the background, and it's like fingers down a chalkboard. It's kind of scraping, just, you know, and I imagine that sort of, you know, if you weren't quite so sensitive to sulphur, you probably wouldn't pick it up. There's a touch of chocolate, some cinnamon. There's a little rawness to it, has to be said. And like I said, Aultmore is very hit and miss. It can be sort of wonderfully dense and fruity, and blenders love the stuff. You know, they love using it because it is kind of you know, a good base to sort of build around, but equally it can be a little bit sort of one-dimensional, a bit and slightly dull, it has to be said. And like I said, this is quite heavily sherried, and just that really minor blemish. But anyway, let's see what the palate's like. A lot of sherry, leafy, Oloroso, cleaner than the nose, although there is that sort of note just on the sort of the back of the tongue. Quite tannic on the finish. Obviously, I think the tannins are being enhanced by the alcohol. A little bitter, but some nice chocolatey notes as well. Not getting a huge amount of distillery character, but then, like I said, Aultmore can be a little bit homogeneous, a little bit sort of, you know, weighty, and sort of undeterminable, I suppose. And like I said, it's one of those sort of malts that you can build a blend around quite nicely, because it kind of like gives you a kind of a base. I'll put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. I mean, it probably really doesn't need it at 53%, but we'll just sort of see what that does to it. Yeah, that's brought out that sulphur note now. It's greener, it's rawer, it's that green nuts, sort of Oloroso-y kind of character. Yeah, I'm not entirely loving this one, it has to be said. Sort of pass like now. Yeah, that sulphur note is really quite noticeable now. It's really quite bitter, austere, tannic. As the sweetness of the dried fruit seems to have sort of disappeared once you put a little drop of water with it, and to me it really isn't floating my boat whatsoever. But again, this is the wonderful world of whiskey, isn't it? You know, what may well appeal to me may not appeal to other people, and vice versa. So if you like slightly raw, slightly sulphurous sherry casks, then you're going to love this. If you don't, you ain't. Simple as that, really, isn't it? Right, okay, let's finish with a little bit of peat. So this is 4-year-old Boona. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Whoa, that's pretty intense. I would have loved to have seen this at cast strength. I mean, God. Phenolic, briny, herbal peat, bog myrtle, tar, creosote, some lovely fruit beneath. I mean, and this is the wonderful thing about Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain's spirit has that lovely fruity character. It's not estery and sort of, you know, banana-y and pineapple-y, but it has a lovely weightiness to it, and it really does peat amazingly well. And it's like Kalila, you know, it's more than just sort of peat. You know, it has a sort of a bigger quality, you know, a broader dimension to it. And this has got some lovely barley notes, and yeah, it's young, but it's not fainty. It's not sort of, you know, there's no rawness to it, and it has that wonderful peaty intensity. Yeah, that's great. That really is great fun. It has to be said. See what the part's like. I mean, it's remarkable that that's drinkable at 4 years old. I mean, no faintiness, no off the still notes, tarry, ashy, intense, slightly phenolic. I mean, I would love to have seen that at cast strength. And bizarrely enough, when I was looking around for the images for today's episode, or for the title page, I noticed that there was a German website that was actually advertising cask strength bottlings of the Battlehill range, so it's quite interesting to see that. You know, I didn't realise that I mean, I knew that Duncan Taylor obviously were big in Germany, a bit like A.D. Rattray and what have you, and I certainly always remember having a conversation with A.D. Rattray about how the Germans seem to nick everything, and I didn't realise that sort of, you know, that Duncan Taylor did specific bottlings for the European market. Probably sensible, really, I suppose. But I would love to have seen that cast strength. I mean, that would be really intriguing and really intense. I mean, it's pretty intense at 46%. I mean, it's got a lovely peaty character, but again, like I said, it's got the weight of fruit. I mean, it's not sort of a fruit monster, but it's got that apricot and barley. You know, just it's not one-dimensional. It's got a sort of, you know, it's youthful and it's fun, and it's a great way to finish a tasting, it has to be said. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of The Shark. Firstly, a big thank you to Duncan Taylor for the samples for today's episode of the show. Hopefully you won't be too disappointed by some of my conclusions. So the Tobermory, well, yeah, okay, it's modern Tobermory. It's modern oaky Tobermory. You know, at least it's not sort of cardboardy and, you know, nasty. It's actually quite pleasant, I suppose. The Jura, probably the most unusual bottling of Jura I've ever come across, and, you know, if it turns out that that was actually Aughantoshan, I would not be totally surprised, as we said. So, assuming it is Jura that's in that little sample bottle, it's okay. You know, it's unusual, but again, it's not. I mean, there was a little bit of a roughness to it, I suppose, on the palate, but by and large, I guess by Jura standards, that was actually pretty good. The Drumblade, yeah, interesting. Loved the nose, thought the nose was really intriguing. Palate, less enamoured by, it has to be said. Think it just needed maybe another year or two in the cask. I mean, I don't think it would have sort of lost too much more of its ABV after a couple of years, but then difficult to say. It was obviously, you know, 10 years old and dropped to 54%. I mean, you know, you probably think, well, maybe that's about right. Maybe it's lost a little bit. I guess a lot of the time when it comes to sort of bottling casks at their natural cask strength, you are having to keep one eye on the ABV, and sometimes that is probably what is the driver for actually bottling the cask, rather than sort of, is it mature enough and is it ready? It's like, well, is it going to drop too far and then, you know, we can't bottle it at all, kind of thing. So maybe the decision to bottle that was based more on the ABV than anything else. The Miltonduff, yep, okay. If you like your sherry Miltonduffs, then absolutely fine, no problem with that whatsoever. Yeah, okay. The Aultmore, not a whole totally enamoured by that. Slight sulphur blemish on there. And you know, the sherry industry keeps going on about how it no longer uses sulphur candles, etc., etc., and maybe there are still some casks that are doing the rounds that have been you know, tainted in this manner. And I will say that you don't come across quite so many of them as you did, say, 10, 12 years ago. So maybe these casks are kind of working their way out and being, you know, retired, shall we say, and turned into garden ornaments or whatever. Frankly, best thing to do with them. And the Bunnahabhain, to be honest with you, probably, you know, probably the malt of the day, it has to be said. You know, 4-year-old Bunnahabhain, peat, you know, oh, really impressive, lovely stuff, it has to be said. Assuming, of course, you love peated malts. You know, if you don't love peated malts, you ain't going to love it at all, really. Anyway. So there you go, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I guess all that's left to say is, no, good morning. It's not actually quite afternoon yet. Brew for breakfast. Anyway, good ramming, good day.